The roar of hammers echoed across the iron caverns of the Blohm and Voss shipyard in Hamburg. It was a symphony of steel and fire, of sparks dancing like fireflies in the gloom, as thousands of German workers labored to birth a monster. Day and night, they shaped her, bending armor plate, riveting bulkheads, installing the engines, and laying the bones of what was meant to be the crowning jewel of Hitler's Kriegsmarine. She was named Bismarck, after the Iron Chancellor, who had forged a united Germany with blood and iron. And like her namesake, this ship was intended to project power, inspire awe, and, if necessary, devastate those who challenged her. Laid down in July 1936, launched in February 1939, and officially commissioned into the German Navy in August 1940, Bismarck was more than a warship. She was a floating fortress, an apex predator in steel. Over 250 meters long and displacing more than 50,000 tons when fully loaded, she was one of the largest battleships ever constructed by any European power. With her sleek lines, raked bow, and powerful propulsion system, 8 high-pressure boilers feeding 3 turbines that drove triple screws, she could slice through the sea at over 30 knots, an impressive feat for her size. Her firepower was her signature. Bismarck carried 8 15-inch SKC-34 naval guns mounted in 4 twin turrets, 2 forward, 2 aft. Each shell weighed nearly a ton and could strike targets over 20 miles away. Her secondary battery of 12 5.9-inch guns could engage cruisers and destroyers, while her vast array of anti-aircraft weaponry, 24.1-inch guns, 16 37mm, and over 40 20mm cannons, provided a formidable defense against aerial attack. She also carried advanced radar systems for gunnery control, a rare feature at the time, giving her a decisive edge in targeting enemy ships, even in poor visibility or at night. But armor was what truly defined Bismarck. Her main belt, up to 320 millimeters thick, encased the vital center of the ship in a fortress of steel. Her turret faces and barbettes were armored to resist direct hits from British 14 and 15-inch shells, while her deck armor, though not invulnerable, was layered to shrug off plunging fire from long-range bombardments. Her watertight compartments and double-bottom hull design improved survivability in the event of torpedo or mine strikes. She was the culmination of decades of German naval engineering, fast, powerful, and clad in protection that promised to keep her alive in a fight. To the Allies, she was a nightmare made manifest. British intelligence followed her construction closely, monitoring spy reports, aerial photographs, and coded transmissions. From Whitehall to Scapa Flow, her name became shorthand for a threat not yet seen, but always looming. Once Bismarck put to sea, she would pose a serious danger to Britain's Atlantic lifeline, the merchant convoys bringing vital food, oil, and military supplies from America and the Empire. With the Royal Navy stretched thin across the globe, even a single German battleship on the loose could wreak havoc on the fragile supply chain keeping Britain in the war. The Royal Navy had good reason to fear her. The scars of the Battle of the Denmark Strait, Jutland, and other dreadnought duels were still etched into naval doctrine. The idea of another German surface raider, especially one so advanced and well-armored, triggered immediate concern at the Admiralty. Bismarck, when paired with another capital ship like the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen or the battleship Tirpitz, could force the British to divert multiple battleships and carriers to hunt her down. It was a threat that could never be ignored. By early 1941, Bismarck had completed sea trials and worked up her crew. She had already demonstrated her capabilities in the Baltic, training under the watchful eye of Admiral Günther Lütjens, a veteran commander who had led German surface units in previous Atlantic raids. Lütjens, calm and reserved, was not an advocate of reckless action, but he believed in Germany's surface fleet and the strategic necessity of commerce raiding to starve Britain into submission. Operation Rheinübung, A bold plan to break out into the Atlantic with Bismarck and Prince Eugen was conceived to strike at Allied convoys far from the reach of land-based air cover. In May 1941, the order came. Bismarck and Prince Eugen would slip through the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland, and from there descend into the open North Atlantic. Once clear, they would scatter and attack convoys at will, forcing the British to hunt them over thousands of square miles of ocean. The plan relied on speed, secrecy, and surprise. German U-boats would relay information on convoy movements, while Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights would provide additional support. But it was a high-stakes gamble. The Royal Navy had its own sentinels, patrols from Scapa Flow, radar stations along the coast, and code breakers at Bletchley Park who were beginning to unravel parts of the Enigma cipher. The eyes of Britain, though sometimes blind, were always watching. On May 18, 1941, under overcast skies and shadowed by the cliffs of the Kiel Canal, Bismarck and Prince Eugen departed their safe harbor. Escorted by destroyers and a shadow of secrecy, they threaded their way through the Danish archipelago, heading north toward Norway. British aircraft spotted them near Bergen, sparking alarm across the Admiralty. By the time they were at sea again, the hunt had begun. The great chase was on. The Royal Navy scrambled ships from Scapa Flow, from Iceland, from Halifax. Every available unit was pressed into the search. The battleship HMS King George V, aircraft carrier HMS Victorious, the cruiser Suffolk, and the pride of the fleet, HMS Hood, the mighty Hood, joined the pursuit. In days, it would come to a head in the icy waters of the Denmark Strait. But as Bismarck disappeared into the fog and storm of the North Atlantic, one thing was certain. She was now beyond the reach of port walls and dry dock gates. She was a predator on the prowl, a symbol of German might, and the Royal Navy's greatest test since the war began. The world held its breath. That day came in May 1941, when the German High Command gave the green light to Operation Rheinübung. It was a daring mission, equal parts strategy and gamble. The goal, to send the most powerful battleship in the German fleet, Bismarck, accompanied by the heavy cruiser Prince Eugen, into the North Atlantic to attack and destroy Allied merchant shipping. Britain was an island nation, utterly dependent on supplies from North America. Oil, food, ammunition, aircraft, and raw materials all arrived by sea, carried in vast convoys across a dangerous ocean, patrolled by U-boats, and threatened by air and surface raiders. To strike at those convoys was to strike at Britain's throat. If Bismarck broke through the Allied blockade and reached the open ocean, the damage she could inflict was immeasurable. Merchant ships would be forced to scatter or travel under heavy escort, and Royal Navy assets would be diverted from other critical theaters to hunt her. She could not be allowed to roam freely. On the evening of May 18, 1941, under cover of darkness and swirling Baltic fog, Bismarck and Prince Eugen slipped from Gotenhofen, modern-day Gdynia, Poland. Accompanied briefly by a screen of destroyers, they sailed north along the Norwegian coast. The plan was simple in design but complex in execution. Head for the Denmark Strait between Greenland and Iceland, then burst into the Atlantic. Once there, the two ships would split up, if necessary, to maximize chaos among the convoys. But nothing went unnoticed in war. Not for long. British aerial reconnaissance, alerted by radio intercepts and intelligence from Bletchley Park, soon detected unusual German naval movements. RAF Spitfires photographed the two warships docked in Bergen, Norway on May 21st. Confirmation of Bismarck's position triggered alarm bells at the Admiralty. This was no ordinary sortie. This was the deployment of Hitler's floating hammer. There would be no waiting game this time. Bismarck was on the move. The Royal Navy sprang into action. Admiral Sir John Tovey, Commander-in-Chief of the Home Fleet, activated a sweeping plan of response. Every available battleship, cruiser, destroyer, and carrier was mobilized. Ships sortied from Scapa Flow, Iceland, and Halifax. Convoys were rerouted. The focus now narrowed on the Denmark Strait, the likely corridor for any breakout. It was a cold, narrow channel of rough seas and fickle weather, a place where detection was difficult, but interception was possible. Tovey had to block the strait, or at least catch the Germans within it. Among the British warships dispatched were two of the most important vessels in the Royal Navy, the battle-cruiser HMS Hood and the newly commissioned battleship HMS Prince of Wales. Hood was the pride of Britain's surface fleet, the largest and fastest capital ship afloat, often called the Mighty Hood. She had served as a symbol of empire and naval power since her launch after World War I. But she was also aging, with thin deck armor that left her vulnerable to plunging fire, a fact known to British commanders but not fully appreciated by the public. Prince of Wales, on the other hand, was still green. She had only recently completed sea trials and was crewed in part by dockyard technicians. Many of her main guns were not yet fully operational. But war allows no time for perfection, and the urgency of the situation demanded her immediate deployment. Under the command of Vice Admiral Lancelot Holland, a quiet and determined officer, the two ships steamed at top speed to intercept Bismarck in the Denmark Strait. Time was short, and the ocean vast. By May 23rd, the German task force had reached the icy waters south of Greenland. British heavy cruisers HMS Suffolk and HMS Norfolk, operating in poor visibility and treacherous conditions, made radar contact with Bismarck and Prince Eugen. They shadowed the German ships from a distance, relaying their positions to the fleet. The cat-and-mouse game had begun. The Germans knew they had been discovered. Admiral Gunther Lutyens, commanding the task force aboard Bismarck, now had a difficult choice: press forward or attempt evasion. Lutyens was a career officer with deep experience but a cautious temperament. He recognized that Bismarck had to break into the Atlantic quickly before being cornered. Yet he also understood the power of the force converging on him. He decided to continue as planned, but ordered Prince Eugen to sail ahead and conduct independent operations against Allied shipping while Bismarck drew the Royal Navy's attention. But the two ships continued together for now, under the veil of mist and cloud. The weather was worsening. Storms lashed the sea and visibility dropped. The cold was bone deep. Ice formed on decks, and waves broke over bow and bridge, but radar pulses pierced the gloom. Suffolk and Norfolk continued shadowing their prey. HMS Hood and Prince of Wales were closing in, steaming through the night, bent on interception. They would engage at first light on May 24th. Aboard Hood, the tension was palpable. Vice Admiral Holland understood the dangers. He planned to close the distance quickly, reducing Bismarck's ability to exploit her superior range and plunging fire. But this meant charging straight in, exposing Hood's weaker deck armor. There was no room for delay, no luxury of maneuver. The plan was simple: open fire, close the range, and rely on British gunnery and tradition to carry the day. Dawn came early in the high northern latitudes, with pale light bleeding over the horizon by 5:30. The seas were rough, the air sharp and raw. Radar confirmed Bismarck and Prince Eugen were directly ahead. Then, at 5:52, visual contact was made. Silhouettes loomed through the mist, dark, massive, unmistakable. The battle was about to begin. Bismarck, sleek and ominous, turned slightly to engage. Her guns swiveled. Her crews stood ready. In the next few minutes, steel giants would clash in a duel of thunder, flame, and death, an echo of Jutland, a reckoning between empires. The Hood surged forward at flank speed, the Union Jack flying proud, her guns ready to fire. The world held its breath. On the gray morning of May 24th, 1941, beneath a heavy ceiling of clouds and over a sea littered with ice, destiny unfurled its sails. At 5:52 a.m., the lookouts on both the Bismarck and the Hood spotted shadowy forms emerging from the mist. The clash that had been building for days was now imminent. Signals flashed, orders barked, guns elevated, rangefinders locked in. The two British ships, HMS Hood and HMS Prince of Wales, advanced on the Germans in a wide arc from the southeast, closing the distance rapidly. Bismarck and Prince Eugen turned to meet the threat, bow on, slowly adjusting formation as gunners prepared for combat. At 5:53, the first salvo cracked the silence. Hood, firing from her forward turrets, opened fire at extreme range, targeting the lead ship, which, due to confusion and poor visibility, was mistakenly believed to be Bismarck, but was actually Prince Eugen. Within seconds, Bismarck responded. Her forward turrets thundered, hurling 15-inch armor-piercing shells in high arcs toward the British line. Prince Eugen joined in, firing 8-inch shells with rapid precision. Prince of Wales, despite still dealing with mechanical issues in her main battery, began returning fire. Salvos roared across the water in a deadly cadence. Shells struck with immense force, throwing geysers of spray and shrapnel into the air. Hood, still closing the range, received the first blow. A shell from Prince Eugen hit her upper deck, sparking a fire near the aft secondary armament. But the fatal strike would come moments later. Aboard the German ships, there was no celebration, only stunned silence. Admiral Lutyens, a cautious and formal man, gave no triumphant orders. The Bismarck had just delivered the most devastating single blow in modern naval history. But the fight was far from over. News of the Hood's destruction raced across the Atlantic, crackling over radios and undersea cables. When Winston Churchill was informed, he responded with a line that would become legend: "Sink the Bismarck at all costs." The loss was not just military, it was spiritual. Hood had been more than a ship, she was an institution. Britain had been bloodied in front of the world, and retribution became a matter of honor. But Bismarck, though victorious, had not emerged unscathed. During the engagement, Prince of Wales had landed 3 hits. One of them ruptured a fuel tank near Bismarck's bow, contaminating her oil reserves and limiting her range. Salt water flooded internal compartments, and her speed dropped slightly. More critically, she was now bleeding oil, a trail that could be followed. At precisely 5:58 a.m., a catastrophic hit sealed the fate of the Royal Navy's most iconic ship. A shell, almost certainly from Bismarck's main battery, struck Hood's weakly armored deck between her mainmast and aft turret. It penetrated deep into the ship's structure and exploded inside the aft magazine. The resulting detonation was apocalyptic. A massive column of flame and smoke erupted from Hood's midsection, followed by a thunderous shockwave that shattered steel and bone. The ship broke in two. In a matter of seconds, the mighty Hood, symbol of Britain's naval pride, was gone. She sank so quickly that few aboard had time to react. Of her crew of 1,418 officers and sailors, only 3 would survive, clinging to wreckage in the freezing waters. Prince of Wales, now under heavy fire herself, disengaged, laying a smokescreen and withdrawing while continuing to fire. Admiral Lutyens faced a fateful decision. He knew that the British home fleet would hunt them relentlessly. Rather than press on into the Atlantic and risk further damage with limited fuel, he decided to abort the operation and steer Bismarck toward occupied France, where repair facilities at Brest could restore her to full fighting. Condition: he detached Prince Eugen to continue independent commerce raiding, while Bismarck turned southeast and began a high-speed dash for sanctuary. For 3 days, the North Atlantic became a vast battlefield of strategy and suspense. British ships fanned out, coordinating through the Admiralty's command center. Aircraft carriers, cruisers, and destroyers joined the chase. HMS King George V and HMS Rodney, both battleships, were ordered to intercept. The aircraft carrier HMS Victorious launched a night airstrike on May 24th using Fairey Swordfish biplanes. Despite the pitch-black skies and stormy conditions, one torpedo struck Bismarck's side. Though the damage was minor, it confirmed that even vulnerable aircraft could get through. The legend of the Swordfish was only beginning, but Bismarck was a master of evasion. She changed course, vanished into rain squalls, and temporarily disappeared from radar. British search efforts faltered. For a moment, it seemed Bismarck had slipped away, ghosting toward France while her hunters searched the wrong patch of ocean. Then, a stroke of luck changed everything. On May 26th, a U.S.-built consolidated PBY Catalina flying boat, operated by the Royal Air Force, took off from Lough Erne in Northern Ireland on a wide-ranging patrol. After hours of scouring the Atlantic, the crew spotted a dark shape moving through the waves, trailing an oily slick. It was Bismarck, 700 miles west of Brest, still out of range of British battleships, but vulnerable to attack. The sighting was radioed back immediately. There was only one British force in position to act before nightfall, Force H, operating from Gibraltar. At its heart was HMS Ark Royal, an older carrier but one equipped with the nimble and dependable Swordfish torpedo bombers. Accompanied by the battlecruiser HMS Renown and the cruiser HMS Sheffield, Force H surged toward Bismarck's last known position. Every minute counted. Aboard Ark Royal, crews scrambled to prepare for launch. The Swordfish, obsolete by modern standards with their canvas wings and slow speed, were all that stood between Bismarck and safety. At 7:10 p.m., in worsening weather and dying light, 15 Swordfish launched from Ark Royal's deck into gale force winds. The mission was clear: disable Bismarck before she reached the protective umbrella of the Luftwaffe. The skies were grim, the rain heavy, and the waves unforgiving. Visibility was poor. In a cruel twist of fate, the first wave of Swordfish mistook HMS Sheffield, sent ahead for reconnaissance, for Bismarck and launched their torpedoes at her. By pure luck, none of the weapons detonated, either due to faulty magnetic fuses or last-second course corrections. The blunder was quickly recognized. A second strike was immediately prepared. At 8:47 p.m., a second wave of Swordfish took off and this time found their target. That evening, May 26, 1941, aboard HMS Ark Royal, preparations moved with fevered intensity. On the windswept flight deck, crews loaded torpedoes beneath the wings of Swordfish biplanes. These aircraft were relics, wood and fabric, their design little changed since the Great War. By the standards of 1941, they were obsolete curiosities. Yet in the brutal, salt-choked winds of the Atlantic, their slow speed and extraordinary maneuverability gave them one unique advantage. They could operate in conditions that would ground faster, more modern planes. The storm worsened as twilight settled over the ocean. Rain lashed the deck, visibility dropped. But there was no time to delay. Bismarck was steaming toward France, limping but still deadly. At 7:10 p.m., a squadron of 15 Swordfish lifted off into the mist, their engines sputtering against the wind. Pilots strained to see through rain-spattered goggles. The sea and sky blurred together in a chaos of motion and cloud. Somewhere ahead was the most dangerous ship afloat. The first attack wave was a disaster. In the swirling gloom, the Swordfish mistook the British cruiser HMS Sheffield for Bismarck. Torpedoes were launched, but incredibly, none hit. Some failed to detonate, others missed their mark. Luck, quick reactions, and poor fuses saved Sheffield from destruction. The pilots returned to Ark Royal bitter but undeterred. A second wave was hastily prepared. Time was running out. Bismarck was still moving at 28 knots, slicing through waves, her crew straining every system to keep her ahead of the closing jaws. But she left a trail of oil, a black wound across the Atlantic that betrayed her every mile. By 8:47 p.m., another wave of Swordfish launched from Ark Royal. The light was fading fast. The wind howled. The rain came in sheets. And yet the biplanes pressed on, flak bursts blooming in the distance as they neared the German Leviathan. Bismarck's AA gunners opened fire. Black puffs peppered the air. Machine guns snarled. But the Swordfish pilots flew low and steady, weaving through deadly tracers. They released their torpedoes one by one, skimming, just above the waves, aiming for the vulnerable hull beneath Bismarck's waterline. And then it happened, a direct hit near the stern. The explosion tore into the ship's steering gear. The rudders jammed hard to port. Almost immediately, the Bismarck began to veer uncontrollably. On the bridge, Admiral Günther Lütjens and Captain Ernst Lindemann understood what had happened. The rudder was gone. The mighty battleship could no longer steer. She was turning in wide, helpless arcs. In seconds, Bismarck's strategic options collapsed. Below deck, engineers fought desperately. Crews crawled through flooded compartments, battling the rising water and the acrid smoke of burning oil. Divers were ordered to enter the aft steering room, but the damage was too great. The rudder was wrecked beyond repair. Bismarck could not be steered manually. Her fate had been decided not by gunfire or shell, but by a single torpedo launched from a biplane, an act of old-world bravery in a New Age war. Through the long, tense night of May 26th to 27th, the crippled battleship drifted in long circles, making only minor course corrections with differential engine thrust. She was still lethal, her guns intact, her crew unwavering, but she was no longer free. British ships closed in from every quarter, converging on the wounded giant like wolves circling a wounded bear. At dawn on May 27th, the gray light revealed a vast, angry ocean. Over the horizon came the final blow. HMS King. George V and HMS Rodney, two British battleships, bore down on Bismarck's position. They were escorted by cruisers, HMS Dorsetshire and HMS Norfolk, and shadowed by destroyers. The task was simple now: finish what had begun in the Denmark Strait. At 8:47 a.m., the British opened fire. Rodney led the assault, firing from a range of just over 20,000 yards. Her 16-inch guns, among the most powerful afloat, sent shells screaming through the air. King George V joined in moments later, her 14-inch guns thundering in salvos. Bismarck returned fire with grim precision. Her shells splashed close to Rodney, straddling the battleship in near misses. But she was at a fatal disadvantage. Her erratic course made gunnery almost impossible, and the British ships, approaching from her stern, had the range and positioning. The bombardment was merciless. Shell after shell crashed into Bismarck. Her superstructure exploded in flames. Her bridge was obliterated. Turrets were hit. Main guns silenced one by one. Communications collapsed. Still, the crew fought on, manning secondary batteries, sending up AA fire even as the decks ran red. Rodney, closing to within 3,000 yards, fired with devastating accuracy. Her shells punched through Bismarck's armor, wrecking engines, smashing control rooms, igniting infernos. Bismarck no longer returned fire. Her guns had gone silent. Smoke poured from her hull. She was sinking, but not fast enough. At 10:20 a.m., with her upper decks wrecked and her resistance ended, the order was given to finish the job. HMS Dorsetshire closed in and launched torpedoes into Bismarck's starboard side. Explosions rocked the dying ship. Men below began to flood the magazines and scuttle the vessel. The Kriegsmarine flag still flew from her mast, shredded but defiant. At 10:39 a.m., Bismarck rolled slowly to port, her proud bow rising one last time, then slipped beneath the waves. The seas swallowed her whole. Out of a crew of over 2,200 men, only 114 survived. British ships picked up what survivors they could, but the threat of U-boats forced a hasty withdrawal. Hundreds of German sailors were left in the water, clinging to debris, calling for help that would never come. The North Atlantic was merciless. Admiral Lutyens was among the dead. So wore Kapitan Lindemann. The pride of Hitler's navy had been annihilated. The cost in lives and ships had been high, but Britain had struck a powerful blow, not just to German naval power, but to Nazi prestige. The Bismarck's sinking was more than a tactical victory. It was a symbol. The mightiest warship of its era, brought down by the resolve of a nation, the courage of ordinary sailors, and a handful of antiquated biplanes flying through the rain. For over an hour, the British ships pounded Bismarck. Shell after shell tore into her superstructure. Her turrets were silenced one by one. Fires raged, her guns shattered, her bridge obliterated. The battleship that had once inspired terror was now a burning wreck. At 10:15 a.m., torpedoes from HMS Dorsetshire were launched. Shortly after, Bismarck began to sink. Some accounts suggest the crew scuttled her to prevent capture. By 10:40 a.m., the Bismarck rolled over and disappeared beneath the waves. Of her crew of over 2,200, only 115 survived, pulled from the cold Atlantic by British ships before a U-boat threat forced them to withdraw. The rest went down with their ship, men who had fought with honor, caught in the gears of global war. The sinking of the Bismarck ended one of the greatest naval chases in history. For Germany, it was a brutal blow to naval ambition. For Britain, it was a hard-won redemption for the loss of the Hood. And for history, it was the end of an era, the last great battleship duel on the high seas. The echoes of the Bismarck's guns would resonate for generations. In her brief voyage, she reshaped naval strategy, electrified the world, and earned a place in legend.